Uh, I'm Tony Zanino, Board Chair of the Guardians, and I would like to welcome you all. We have some distinguished guests, which I would like to acknowledge. We have Ann Scott from the County Commission. We have Sarah Bird, who is Chair of the County Commission. And we have Peggy Townsend, who is Jupiter Island, head of the council. Before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the passing of one of our board members, Eric Weisel. He was a Hope Sound resident for 33 years. Owner of the Hope Sound Pool Company, and an avid outdoorsman, as well as a distinguished and very popular community leader. We're all very sorry on his passing. He's going to be missed a great deal, and we're very sorry. On a lighter note, I'd like to acknowledge a bequest that we got from the J. Wynn Thorson and Francis W. Thorson estate, which, in accordance with its terms, are going to be used as an endowment to ensure the viability of the Guardians going forward, the interest of which can be used for operations. I would also like to announce that Jackie Thoreau-Lippisch has agreed to rejoin our board. Very happy. And I want to give a special thanks to a board member who has made all this possible and has worked day to day throughout the year to organize and promote the Guardians. And that's John said. Oh. Now, many of you know the Guardians, but I just want to reiterate a little bit that Guardians were started by Bernie Auer many, many years ago. When he saw the development of Palm Beach County growing, he saw the sprawl in St. Lucie County, and he wanted to protect what he loved about Martin County. And through the years, he worked very diligently, as well as Peter Conzi continued his work to develop what is now the Guardians of Martin County. And our mission is to help shape the future of Martin County by educating its residents on the value of balancing the natural and man-made resources in order to enhance the quality of life of all the residents in this community. And while we are a small little organization, we endeavor to do this by partnerships. We collaborate with just about every environmental group in Martin County, as well as a number of community groups. We do this by listening and acting on advice that we get from our esteemed, both on national and on state level, things that are going to affect Martin County, from our very valuable board of advisors. And we also do this by monitoring and reviewing every request, every development request that comes before the Board of County Commissioners. So our goal then is really to support responsible growth and to ensure that the natural environment is respected and that Martin County difference is protected. And so this afternoon, you're going to see highlights of some of the things that we've been doing, some of the efforts that we continue to support, efforts that we have helped start and support, and an effort that we are still exploring. Our first presenter is, we are honored to have. He's a gentleman, a resident of Hope Sound, 50 years. He has served on a number of Martin County community planning as advisory boards. And in November, he was elected county board member from District 3. District 3 is the largest district in Martin County. It stretches from Jupiter Island all the way to Lake Okeechobee, and from the southern border north, I think almost to Canner-Iowa. So I would like to introduce Blake Capps. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony, for the warm introduction, and thank you, Guardians, for all that you do to preserve the Martin County difference. Thanks for coming out this afternoon and for the opportunity to get to speak to you just for a few moments. I've served now as the Martin County Commissioner for District 3 for about 13 months. And I would say this is one of the most rewarding things that I've ever gotten to do. So thank you for the opportunity to represent you in your county government. There are a lot of things we could talk about today, like the Martin County difference, the Martin County comprehensive plan that makes us different, the half-cent sales tax referendum called Martin Forever that passed last November that will enable us to purchase thousands of additional acres of conservation land in the coming years, or on our recent progress in septic to sewer conversions that will help us to clean up our waterways. And I know all of those issues are near and dear to all of our hearts, and particularly to this particular group. But instead, I want to focus our attention on a subject that I spoke about at the Hope Sound Chamber of Commerce breakfast a few weeks ago that seemed to get good reviews, and people seem to appreciate it. And I think it bears repeating. So I thought we would make that same presentation again to you. Let's begin with a question. How many of you have ridden around in Martin County and you've noticed these big yellow signs on the sides of the roads about a new development going in? Perhaps it's under construction. Perhaps it's not yet under construction, but you know it's coming. The big yellow sign is there. And you said to yourself, why did those commissioners allow this to happen? I will confess that I have felt that way myself on a number of occasions. And what we can do to answer this question is to deepen our understanding of local government power in Florida and to look at a few of the limitations to that power. First, local government power. The Florida Constitution established the doctrine of home rule in 1968 in the Constitution, and it basically said that local governments have the power of self-government as long as the state has not already preempted that power. And an example of preemption would be the Live Local Act, Senate Bill 102, which basically says that commercially zoned property can be converted to high-density apartment buildings administratively and without county commission approval if certain conditions are met. And we have a project in Martin County that's being built currently under the Live Local Act. It is called Barron Landings on Canner Highway by Cove Road. It's the old Golf World site, and it's under construction now, and it will soon be 302 new apartment units. And it's coming online without county commission approval. It's Senate Bill 102. That's preemption. The state has preempted us, on that issue. Another limitation on local government power has to do with our policies and laws that govern land. And these policies and laws are reflected in the phrases on these big yellow signs that you see on the sides of the roads. And we've made up some of these yellow signs to illustrate to you what these signs say. And we want you to key into a few key phrases so that when you're riding around looking at them, hopefully you're not driving off the road. My wife gets frustrated at me at times because sometimes I pull over or maybe make a U-turn because I'm not familiar with one of those signs, and I feel like I need to know where they all are, and just in case somebody asks me, hey, have you know about that one over there, and what's going on with that? So anyway, my executive aide, Colleen, is going to help flip through a few of these signs for us. Thank you, Colleen, for coming. And I've teased her publicly in the past about how maybe she should just be the commissioner because she's very popular. And I'm very honored that I was able to get her as my executive aide because she makes my life a whole lot easier. Well, the first sign we want to talk about is the Comprehensive Plan Amendment, CPA. And anytime you see CPA, I just want you to remember a few things. The first thing is that it's a broad policy decision that applies to future land use. And this is a legislative decision. And think about what that probably means. If the commissioners are sitting up there as legislators, and it's about policy, and the legislators' opinions are relevant on the matter at hand. So it's a legislative decision. It does not apply to a specific parcel of property, but rather it applies to a large chunk of land on the future land use map. FLUM, F-L-U-M. There's this big map of the county with these color-coded squares in various places throughout the county that denote different densities that are allowed in those chunks of land. The legal standard for a comprehensive plan amendment is fairly debatable. As long as the decision is fairly debatable, you can say yes or no. And this comprehensive plan amendment is the time when it is fair to praise or criticize your commissioner for his or her vote on the matter at hand, as this is the time when commissioners have the greatest degree of discretion. So just remember that about the comprehensive plan amendment. These are like the big decisions, oftentimes larger projects or larger developments, but not always. Sometimes even smaller developments need a comp plan amendment. So, Colleen, if you could switch this on, we're going to talk about the second one, And this is called the zoning change. And unlike the comprehensive plan amendment that is a legislative policy decision on a large chunk of land, the zoning change applies to a specific parcel of property. And this decision is a quasi-judicial decision. And think about what that means. You remember we said the comp plan amendment was a legislative decision. The zoning change is a judicial decision. It's like the commissioners are sitting up there as judges in black robes. And think about what that probably means. Their opinions, the commissioners' opinions, are not controlling on the matter. The legal standard is different. Instead of fairly debatable, like with the comp plan amendment, the legal standard is competent, substantial evidence in the record. So if you want to say no to a zoning decision, you need good evidence-based reasons for saying no. You can still say no, but it's got to be more objective than with the comprehensive plan amendment. So the commissioners have less discretion with zoning changes. And then the third sign we want to look at is called Plan Unit Development, PUD. The Plan Unit Development is a type of zoning. It's still a zoning decision, but it's a type of zoning that is unique. The key word for PUD is negotiation. The PUD is a negotiation. It is where the applicant and the county negotiate for public benefits. The applicant usually wants a density bump or increase in exchange for things that the straight zoning rules do not require. Perhaps he was willing to put in a traffic light at the entrance to the development, or perhaps he's willing to put in a thick tree buffer along the main road when the zoning rules would not require it. And in exchange for that, he wants to build, 10 or 20 more houses, make the lot smaller. And that's called a PUD. It's a negotiation. And Colleen, did you circle that word negotiation? So they'll remember that. And then lastly, we want to talk about final site plan approvals. When you get your comprehensive plan amendment and your zoning change, you come in for your final site plan approval. And I like to think of the comprehensive plan amendment as the cake and the zoning change as the icing on the cake and the final site plan as the cherry on top. And like zoning changes, final site plans are quasi-judicial decisions with the legal standard of competent substantial evidence in the record. And this is generally not the time when projects get shut down. This is the time to look at the details of the project to make it a little better. So commissioners generally have even a little bit less discretion on the final site plan approvals conceptually than even with the zoning. So you have the most discretion with the comprehensive plan amendment, a little bit less discretion with the zoning change, and even a little less discretion with the final site plan approval. Now, final site plans can be major or minor final site plans. So the next sign we're looking at is the major final site plan. I just want you to remember two things about that. One is that major final site plans are 50 houses or more, and that they do come before the Board of County Commissioners for final approval because they're major final site plans. The last sign we want to look at is the minor final site plan. And if you don't remember anything else I said today, I want you to remember the word minor. Minor final site plans are projects with fewer than 50 houses. Fewer than 50 houses, and here's the big kicker. They do not come before the Board of County Commissioners for review. Instead, like with the Senate Bill 102 Live Local Act, they are approved administratively by the Growth Management Department. So these minor final site plans are all over Martin County. I dare say that 40 or 50% of the yellow signs that you see driving along the roads say minor final site plan. There are 6 or 8 of them in Hope Sound right now. And none of them are ever coming to the Board of County Commissioners. I'm going to give you 3 quick examples. One, Oasis at Hope Sound, which is the old flower farm site on Gomez Avenue. It's a proposal for 38 home sites, so it's less than 50. So it's a minor final site plan approval. They don't need comprehensive plan amendments or zoning changes, and the final site plan approval is not even coming to the Board of County Commissioners. Another one is Hope Sound Center on Lairs Avenue and Bridge Road. This one's not going to be popular. I wish the guy wouldn't build it. If you think of that corner right there, right on the main drag coming into Hope Sound, he wants to build a townhouse building on Lairs Avenue that's 3 stories with 5 townhouse units. And then as he wraps around the corner on Bridge Road, he wants to build 2 small commercial buildings with restaurants on the bottom and apartments on the top. The sign is up, and if you look at it, it says minor final site plan approval. It'll never be coming to the board. I know that when they start building it, I'm probably going to get a lot of emails, and I wish I could do something about it, but it's not coming to the board, just so you know. And then the third one I'll mention is a little project called Dunworth on Dixie Highway by the Hope Sound Scrub Preserve. There are 2 buildings that are being built right now, and they're going to have commercial on the bottom and townhouse units on the top. It's a very small project, but never coming to the Board of County Commissioners. So in conclusion, when reviewing these signs in the future, I hope you'll consider whether the decision is legislative, as MP comprehensive plan amendment, or whether the decision is quasi-judicial, like with the zoning change, the PUD zoning, or the final site plan approval. And also, when you see the words final site plan, consider whether it's major or minor. And remember that the minor projects never come to the Board of County Commissioners. I hope this little talk has been helpful to you in helping you understand how commissioners deal with land use decisions in Martin County. I want to thank you again for your vital role in preserving the Martin County difference. And I appreciate each and every one of you and all that you do for Martin County. And I hope you all have a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. Thank you.
That was great. That was great. Our next speaker has a Jupiter Island connection, but has spent 10 years in conservation strategy, private investment, and environmental project execution. For the past 2 years, he's been the Florida field representative of the Conservation Fund, and is involved with Treasured Lands and the Guardians and enthusiastically conserving hydrologically important lands in the Loxalucy Initiative area. I'd like to introduce Charles Dowles.
Could actually back up one presentation. I can tell you about Martin County forever, but that's not.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Tony, for the kind introduction, and I would like to thank as well the Guardians of Martin County for gathering us all here this afternoon and for affording the opportunity for me to speak a bit more on the Loxalucy Headwaters Initiative. My name is Charles Donaldson. I'm a field representative with the Conservation Fund, and while I've worn many hats in this role, at base level, my work revolves around deal sourcing and execution, landowner and stakeholder engagement, as well as land management and restoration activities. I'm staffed on several projects in the state. The Loxalucy takes up a significant portion of my time, in no small part because it is close to home. I spent a lot of time on Bridge Road. The Loxalucy Headwaters Initiative is an effort to preserve the last undeveloped and unprotected natural landscape east of 95 in South Florida. The initiative seeks to connect Jonathan Dickinson and Atlantic Ridge Preserve State Parks, as well as protecting and restoring the headwaters of the Loxahatchee and St. Lucie rivers. That's where the name comes from. As we will see, our focus area constitutes a 10,000-acre mosaic of wetland marshes and low-elevation pinelands that are critical to maintaining healthy watersheds and habitats. This map shows a broad aerial view of South Florida. You can see clearly the demarcation of gray to green all along the southeast coast. There's a clear difference in land use between the coastline and what goes on out west to Okeechobee, where much of the land remains either in agriculture or is already conserved, such as the Everglades National Park, various state parks, or other natural and wildlife management areas. That is, until you get to the Loxalucy focus area, which is outlined in white. These two maps show the land use change in Palm Beach, Martin, and St. Lucie counties from 1985 to 2023. The effect of development pressure in Southeast Florida is ever increasing. I think it's maps like this that helped sponsor the creation of organizations like the Guardians. Displayed here by the encroaching red coloration, in Palm Beach and St. Lucie counties, that agricultural land was enveloped as development sprawled westward and marched towards the Everglades. However, in Martin County, we have largely been spared that runaway development, thanks again to the Guardians. Again, outlined in white, lies the last bastion of large-scale conservation in this region. These view sheds are likely familiar to you all. On the left, Bridge Road, looking east toward Hope Sound and the gateway to this town hall here. It is starkly juxtaposed with that very same viewpoint looking down Indiantown Road. These photos are from aerials from Google Earth on the same day, the exact same landmass from last year. These two exits are less than 8 miles apart, and if you spend any time exiting off 95, you know that feeling of coming home. On either side of you is open green space culminating in the tunnel of trees as you come down to here. If we lose this open space, there is no return. Once it's gone forever. The Conservation Fund, Guardians of Martin County, Charter Lands Foundation, and many others are not the only ones aware that this is an area both undeveloped and unprotected. Residential and community developments are underway. The as signs of these changing times, increased traffic, noise, and light pollution are the preliminary planning for new interstate and turnpike interchanges, and we must consider the long-range planning for the future of Bridge Road, to include better drainage and hydrological infrastructure, wildlife underpasses, and other ecological and hydrological efficiencies. These are the sorts of questions that we consider. For all the defining characteristics of this area and of Hope Sound, the initiative has been triaging our efforts to strategically secure it for conservation, for its enormous potential for habitat and wildlife connectivity, for its natural capability to manage water, and for the very same reasons this program would protect the watershed, so too it would protect the viewshed when driving down Bridge Road. These are the maps that I look at internally, and I pore over these almost every day. We really do love poring over the maps. But this shows the Loch Lucy focus area, with Stewart to the north, Jupiter to the south, Hope Sound to the east, and 95 to the west. In green are the existing conservation lands, which include the state parks, county-owned conservation land, and conservation easements. And the beige-brown color shows the initiative's parcels of interest. These are the parcels that we've deemed highest priority to protect and conserve. In red are the 3 properties we've acquired to date, in no small part to the tremendous efforts of those gathered here today. What do all these polygons and shaded areas constitute? What impact would protecting and conserving this area have? Now's my opportunity to get into the weeds with you, to step off Bridge Road and into the field to share some of the data we've gathered, and it helps to illustrate why it's all so important. I will reiterate that this area is the headwaters of the Loxahatchee and the South Fork of the St. Lucie. The water that flows through this catchment area feeds the nation's most biodiverse estuary, the Indian River Lagoon. Through this lagoon flows the northeastern extent of the greater Everglades watershed, and to lose any of the clean fresh water moving through it only serves to further compound toxic discharges from Lake Okeechobee. That area just over the bridge, between here and 95, is what feeds clean, naturally filtered, fresh water into this lagoon. It's the same water I fished as a young boy, and now I fish as a young man. I know many of you equally value and enjoy spending time on, living near, or looking over the water. Now, if we're successful in our goals, Loch Lucy will have protected 3,500 acres of wetlands. Every year, those wetlands will filter 16.5 million gallons of fresh water, and every single gallon of that number is critical for drinking water recharge. Our goal is to protect, preserve, and where applicable, restore the historic flows leading into these rivers. And in this way, the initiative is a microcosm of broader Everglades restoration. In the same way we were trying to restore natural flows into the Everglades ecosystem, Loch Lucy aims to preserve the flows into this ecosystem, having a direct impact on this area and its water. As the Guardians of Martin County is well aware, and Commissioner Capps alluded to earlier, the Martin County difference is a term often used to describe this area. It's referred to as the reason for which so many choose to live here. It's perhaps best seen driving along the interstate and Bridge Road, where to your left and right is seemingly endless open space. Much of that space is conservation or agricultural land, protected either through acquisition or through easements. Our focus area constitutes 10,000 acres of privately owned land, more than 90% of which are considered high conversion pressure acres. That's a term that basically means they're at a distinct risk of development. This acreage is not just empty pasture or fallow agricultural fields. It constitutes the home and habitat for over 300 plant and animal species, 22 of which are deemed threatened or endangered. The Florida Wildlife Corridor is a program that calls for a connected greenway all over Florida, running the entirety of the state from north to south and east to west. Congruent with this project's similarities to Everglades restoration, Loch Lucy is an opportunity for a complete network of protected lands from between Hope Sound Beach and Lake Okeechobee, from east to west, and from Stewart to Jupiter, from north to south. Once protected, this land is not just left to its own devices. It will be preserved, restored, and managed for conservation. Some of you may have seen this restoration taking place on one of our acquisitions, which is 2 miles of road frontage along Bridge Road. Management and restoration massively enhance the habitat of these properties and restores them to their natural state. In doing so, we enhance not just those distinct parcels and microclimates, but the entire area. Our properties are critical connector pieces for the state parks, and by restoring them, we are enhancing the natural public lands. Both Johnson Dickinson and Atlantic Ridge are integral to the community. Their reach extends far beyond Hope Sound and Martin County. More than 350,000 people visited these parks alone last year. That number does not include county-owned land or other natural areas. The visitation numbers are only from the state parks. As Jessica Namath is intimately familiar, and many of you are as well, in August of last year, plans were leaked for a state-developed golf course in Jonathan Dickinson. Overnight, there was bipartisan pushback. I see Jim out twitching. Overnight, there was bipartisan pushback, and 150,000 people signed the petition to stop the proposed development, with 50,000 in the first 24 hours. Jessica, I hope those numbers are... Thank you. This immense showing proves that the public wants to preserve their access to wild landscapes. There are over 200,000 people living within a 10-mile radius. Access to open space is a fundamental part of their quality of life. It's a key reason that people choose to live here, and they want more of it. The Conservation Fund has a dual charter to advance both environmental and economic vitality. We connect Americans with the land that sustains us. People and nature can only thrive when we thrive together. We are not an advocacy organization. Our mission is to put acreage into conservation. That does not mean we are necessarily anti-development, but rather we are pro-responsible development. We envision an America where nature and land are protected and valued as the engines driving climate solutions, sustainable economies, and vibrant communities like Hope Sound. We make that a reality by doing conservation differently, as we are here with Loch Lucy. So what does success look like? For Loch Lucy, we're working with public and private entities to conserve land, to promote environmentally conscious land use, to prioritize wildlife crossings, and to build hydrological infrastructure. We restore the habitats and watersheds to bolster the existing ecosystem. And what does that landscape look like if we attain our goals? And here it is. When my coworkers and I shared this vision with Larry Selzer, the Conservation Fund CEO, he asked me, Charles, if you could snap your fingers, what would it take? And by our current estimates, to protect this 10,000-acre landscape would constitute an investment. We put those dollars to work by being strategic. Not only do we triage our efforts to acquire properties, we also negotiate conservation easements. And we build partnerships. We pursue alternative strategies to maximize the returns on every dollar deployed. And just like the species and habitats they include, every property, every parcel, and every landowner require a unique approach and a unique solution. So how do we get there? This 10,000-acre area does not exist in isolation, and protecting a 10,000-acre mosaic of privately owned land would link over 70,000 acres of conservation land. That's why it's so important to protect this corridor between two state parks. In that same way, we can leverage philanthropic dollars with partner funding. You heard earlier how the Conservation Fund works with our partners, and that really is our specialty, and we're no strangers to projects of this scale. Loch Lucy is a coalition. Already, the initiative has raised over $7 million for land acquisition, in no small part thanks to the work of many of you here today and the Guardians of Martin County, who have done incredible work to that end, helping to sponsor Loch Lucy's first 3 strategic acquisitions. Because of that work, we're able to move quickly and efficiently, acquiring those properties at yesterday's prices rather than prices 5 years from now. But our work is much more than increasing buying power. You here this afternoon, along with over 250 others, represent political power. Your voices are heard, emphasizing the importance of this project. Through Martin County Forever and the sales tax referendum passed last November, John Keller, Merritt Matheson, who serves on the ELOC committee, Commissioner Capps, and Chairman Hurd helped to create over $200 million for environmental land acquisition in Martin County, of which Loch Lucy defined area, and we hope that a large portion will be deployed here. The Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan is the single largest environmental restoration program in the world. and Loxalucy is a substantial part of its northeastern extent. This restoration plan is a $20 to $30 billion federal-state partnership, which has proven to be an incredible vehicle for conservation. The state of Florida has two main land protection programs. The Rural and Family Lands Protection Program preserves lands specifically through permanent agricultural conservation easements. Over the last several years, it has allowed for more than $400 million of easements across Florida, including more than $50 million for an easement on Bullhammock Ranch just to our north. And another easement is proposed on Barbie Ranch to our west in Martin County. There are many properties within Loxalucy that are eligible for this funding, and some are already in the application process. Florida Forever is one of the largest public land acquisition programs in the United States. It is the state of Florida's premier conservation and recreation lands acquisition program. To date, it has acquired more than 1 million acres of land in the state. Historical funding has been at or above $100 million a year. And while we hope it will return to those numbers, approximately $3.8 billion have been deployed since the program's inception. All of the largest land holdings in our focus area are eligible for this funding. Even together, it will take all of these sources to reach our goals. I maintain that Loxalucy can achieve our objectives, and we can protect this entire area through careful due diligence and planning, as well as through leveraging these programs to that end. In a climate of rising prices, we can move quicker and more efficiently, knowing that we have the support of those here today. And we are better equipped to draw the previously mentioned programs together on a united front. If we can protect in its entirety more than 2,000 miles of the Appalachian Trail, running from Georgia to Maine through 14 states, then surely we can unite to connect these parks and the rivers that flow through them. Heartfelt thank you to the Guardians of Martin County for inviting me to speak with you all today and for all of your support to date. For your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Sneak.
Our next speaker is a strong advocate for clean water and former mayor of the city of Stewart. For the past 2 years, he's been working with Jim Snedeker on the Martin County Forever initiative, which, in order to gain support for and the successful passage of the half-cent sales tax for the purchase of lands for conservation. He and Jim sit on the Environmental Lands Oversight Committee, which is guiding the county on the selection of properties. I'd like to introduce Mayor Matthew.
Good afternoon. I'm going to use a term that my father frequently uses. I'm a Luddite, which means I'm not good at technology. I also have low vision, but there we go. That term worked. I think they read my mind. We have my presentation up. There we go. Anyway, I'm Merrick Matheson, a founding member of Martin County Forever, former mayor of City of Stewart, Rivers Coalition board member, president of the Indian River Keeper, waterman, and general all-around conservationist. And I'd like to thank Martin County Forever. I'd like to thank the Guardians of Martin County for hosting this. And I know it's already been said before, but I want to thank them for all the historical work and future work they do to preserve the Martin County difference. Martin County Forever's referendum passed by 64%. That's something that we all need to be proud of. It's almost unheard of residents of Martin County overwhelmingly chose to tax ourselves to protect why we live here, to protect that Martin County difference. Martin County Forever's leaders have now transitioned from informing the public about the referendum to key roles in the Environmental Lands Oversight Committee, the ELOC. The main job of that ELOC, that oversight committee, is to act as a bridge between the public and the Board of County Commissioners, to help disseminate information, to do what I'm here doing today. Because one of the goals, as I'll reiterate, is to keep this process going. It was passed for 10 years, but I would love to see it be repassed. And the way to do that is to have public trust. So the ELOC, the main job I see of the board I'm honored to sit on as vice chair, is to keep that public trust with the Board of County Commissioners. So that if this comes back up for a vote 9 years from now, it passes overwhelmingly again. We're honored to have Jim Snedeker, one of the other founding members, as the chair of that oversight committee board, and John Keller, another founding member, sits on that board as well. So how does the whole process work? We're about a year in now, and it's all about acquiring land in specific key environmentally sensitive areas in Martin County to preserve that difference. That land is strategically positioned to do such things as connect Atlantic Ridge State Park to Jonathan Dickinson State Park, promote wildlife corridors, enhance public use, and protect water quality. First off, properties are nominated and screened for approval. And importantly, anyone can nominate a property. You don't have to be the property owner. That nomination form is on our website, martincountyforever.com. It's also on the Board of County Commissioners website. Once nominated, staff screens those properties for approval before they're sent to the Oversight Committee. That screening involves, one, the properties have to have a willing seller, willing to negotiate with the county staff for either fee simple acquisition or a conservation easement. And two, the properties have to fit in one of the 4 strategic areas that the referendum tax dollars target. After they're screened for approval, they're presented to the Oversight Committee in an open, notified public meeting at the Board of County Commission chambers. Myself and the other members grade those properties on various criteria and vote whether or not to send them to the County Commission for approval. Once sent there and approved by the county, Martin County staff then moves forward with negotiations on acquisition or purchase of a conservation easement with the property. As I said, the nomination forms are available on our website. Anyone can nominate a property. Been talked about a couple times, but I'd like to touch on those conservation easements. To leverage funding, Martin County works with existing state programs for conservation easements. Any funding from the referendum that passed that goes towards the purchase of a conservation easement has to be irrevocable and in perpetuity. That language was in the referendum and cannot be changed by a county commission, existing or in the future. That is incredibly important and some of the feedback we got when we were structuring this referendum. Conservation easement, just to break it down, is basically purchasing any development rights from a property. Now, there are 2 types of programs that the state runs for conservation easements, and they do have a minor difference. The Rural and Family Lands Protection Program has a primary purpose to protect agricultural use for farming and ranching. Its secondary purpose is to conserve and protect natural resources. Recent years have shown that the state has put a significant amount of funding for this program. I like to call it the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program. The other program was mentioned here as well. It's the Florida Forever program. The Florida Forever program has a primary purpose to protect natural resources of the land. It's a subtle difference, but it's pretty important. Grants from the Florida Forever program can be used for fee simple acquisition of properties, as well as to purchase a conservation easement. The Oversight Committee has had 2 substantial meetings so far this year. Our first meeting, 2 properties were discussed, totaling over 2,000 acres. One of the first properties we discussed was Palmar. In that, we looked at properties consisting of over 387 acres of land. Negotiations are either finalized or ongoing for fee simple acquisition of this land. And you can see in that checkerboard pattern there, all those dark green areas, unowned, and many of them owned by separate property owners. Palmar is some of the highest quality wetlands in Martin County. And consolidating that land and those wetlands is critical to managing it properly. The next property we looked at in that first meeting was Barbie Ranch. The negotiations, I believe, are finalized now for 1,700 acres to be put in a conservation easement in partnership with the Florida Forever program. That's the one that prioritizes protecting the land's natural resources. Now, you might not have public access on that land, but that land will never be developed. And prior to this happening, as I'm sure Commissioner Capps knows and Commissioner Hurd knows, their property rights allowed them 1 house per 20 acres. Now that other shaded area to your left and the bottom, that land is the C-44 reservoir and STA project, one of a SERP project. So you can see how strategic that land is to protecting water quality in the C-44 basin that eventually flows into the St. Lucie River. Keeping that land in its pervious natural state is why we're doing this. In the second Oversight Committee meeting, we reviewed over 16 properties encompassing over 9,000 acres. We looked at properties in all 4 of the acquisition zones that the referendum approves. And we looked at a mix of fee simple acquisition and conservation easement purchase. For time constraints, I'm just going to highlight 2 of the acquisition zones. Goes without saying that I'm going to highlight the Loxalucy acquisition zone for obvious reasons. In that zone, we looked at properties encompassing over 2,740 acres of potential acquisition. The first one, Witham Farms. This is 2,262 acres, and it bisects the South Fork of the St. Lucie River. Plain and simple, you want to keep a river clean, what goes in has to be clean. So you have to start at its headwaters. This property right in the heart of the Loxalucy is already in negotiations, and I'd love to see it purchased. The next one, Poinciana Gardens, 225 acres of previously plotted lots. This property buffers Atlantic Ridge State Park and being previously plotted, has the potential to be developed into hundreds of home sites. The next property, the Leonard parcel, 229 acres. The negotiations for this would be for an agricultural conservation easement. But this could be a potential connection from a greenway from Jonathan Dickinson State Park. The Rogers Atlantic parcel, 3 acres, adjacent to and a buffer for Atlantic Ridge State Park. The Rogers Conservation Fund parcel, 4.5 acres, that again can help connect Jonathan Dickinson State Park and Atlantic Ridge State Park. One of the top priorities not only of the Conservation Fund and the Loxalucy, but of Martin County forever. Finally, the Petway property, 20 acres, part of the eastern flowway of Kitchen Creek. Again, keeping an area, a river's tributaries clean before the water flows in to a river is critical for water quality. This water eventually makes it, as you all know, into the Loxahatchee River. Finally, I'd like to touch on the Blue Ways acquisition zone and the properties we discussed thus far. Now, the Blue Ways acquisition zone isn't one specific area. The Blue Ways is any property in Martin County that is undeveloped and along the waterfront. So if you're talking to people and you see a property that's undeveloped along the waterfront, think about it. You can go out and fill out a nomination form. Go to Martin County Forever website, fill out a property nomination form. We'll push it on Martin County staff to see if it's a willing seller to negotiate. The next 3 properties are here in this slide together. They are the Jane Wild, Burstein, and Kressler parcels. Together they encompass 12.5 acres along the natural South Fork of the St. Lucie River. And they're adjacent to Oxbow Preserve, that green area on the bottom right. This area was less than a mile from my house where I grew up, and I frequented it as a young child. Those natural oxbows, those 180-degree turns in the South Fork, that's what makes the St. Lucie River so biodiverse. When you look at those straightaways, the water might be 5 feet deep. Right where it makes that turn, that water could go down to 18 or 20 feet deep. That incredible change that evolved over hundreds of years is the biodiversity we're trying to protect. Another property in the Blue Ways acquisition zone, we're going to head out to Hutchinson Island. It's the Perry Beach Addition. This is a 1-acre parcel adjacent to the Perry Beach Preserve to the north, that green area. And it spans from mangrove habitat on the river all the way out to the beachfront. And as we all know, it's been acquisitions like this of why when we want to go to the beach in Martin County, we don't have to break out our wallet like they do to the counties south of us and pay for parking. I'm going to wrap it up there, but I'd like to close by saying that within the first year, the program, negotiations are moving forward or have already been completed on over 11,000 acres of environmentally sensitive land in Martin County. We have 9 more years to go. We should be proud. That's tangible action that has happened. The money is now there because of everyone in this room speaking to everyone else and all the groups that have been mentioned pushing the referendum to pass. But one of my goals in the future is to have this conservation program be continued on. Because what I've learned thus far is that the best way to manage growth is to grow your conservation land. Thank you.
Our next speaker is an avid environmentalist, a recent and valued member of our advisory board who founded Florians for Public Lands, which is dedicated to protecting public lands and the environmental integrity in Florida. Recently, she led a very successful, as you've heard, protest against the state's proposal to do development in Jonathan State Park. And currently, she's been working with Eve Samples on protecting the Everglades. Jessica, name it.
Thank you. Let's see. Right. Well, thank you all for having me. Thank you, Guardians, for allowing us the opportunity to talk about this. Eve, unfortunately, is not with us today because she is in Washington, D.C., where she is meeting with more than a dozen congressional offices to provide updates on alligator Alcatraz and other issues facing the Everglades. Given the bedrock environmental laws that are threatened, especially NEPA, and the immense government cost burden of the facility, the congressional oversight is extremely important. Otherwise, she would certainly be here speaking to you all. As we said, my name is Jessica Namath. I have been a resident for almost 40 years on the Loxahatchee River in Tequesta. I served for 5 years on Tequesta's Environmental Committee, Advisory Committee, and stepped down the month before last, for 2024, our state parks came under attack, which some of you might remember. I was able to put together a group called Protect Jonathan Dickinson State Park, of which we now have nearly 50,000 members, and we're successfully able to pass legislation to protect those parks. And the group, once doing so, transitioned into Floridians for Public Lands, because you might recall that we also had the Withlacoochee State Forest come under attack, and Guana River, which was one of our WMAs. So much like we did for the State Park Preservation Act, we would like to see similar legislation passed to protect our other public lands. We, Eve and I, after having worked together on the state parks, found ourselves once again frustrated and united when the governor seemingly won his state park won his public lands battle by seizing land in Miami-Dade County through an emergency and his eminent domain for this facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. I first and foremost see it as, again, a public land seizure, because that is property of which only the runway has ever been fenced off, and my family and myself, along with many others, have enjoyed the other 20,000 plus acres of land that we no longer have access to go hiking or fishing, or people go out and photograph astronomy. You know, they'd enjoy the dark sky. So this, first and foremost, to me was, again, a public land seizure. I wanted to start. Do I click, or is somebody clicking here for me? I click? Okay. So I would like to reintroduce you all to Miss Marjorie Sternman Douglas, who is the founder of Friends of the Everglades, and who we love for saying, be a nuisance where it counts. Do your part to inform and stimulate the public to join your action. Be depressed, discouraged, and disappointed at failure and the disheartening effects of ignorance, greed, corruption, and bad politics, but never give up. She, along with another name you might recall, Mr. Nathaniel Reed, and many others, joined forces back in the 60s at this very site location that we're battling to save and get back again today, because there was a proposal to build the world's largest jetport. And she, along with her allies, with the Miccosukee and Seminole tribes, and many, many others, conservationists and passionate Floridians, were able to stop that from happening, but not before there was one runway that was built. And that one runway is where we're talking about today. Some of the things that I have realized through this battle is that there's confusion between names of different groups and the location of this facility. Friends of the Everglades is not to be confused with Everglades Foundation, for example. And they're the ones who have joined forces with Center for Biological Diversity to bring forth a federal lawsuit against the state and federal government to enforce the laws that should have been adhered to prior to any of this really happening to begin with, most importantly NEPA, which is our Environmental Protection Act, that if one federal dollar is spent on anything, we have to do an environmental assessment on it and go through a set of procedures that were not adhered to in this particular case. The other confusion that I sometimes hear is that this isn't located in the Everglades. People seem to be confused with Everglades National Park and the Everglades. As you can see in this map, the Everglades span a very broad distance, and the location of this facility is in Big Cypress National Preserve, and Everglades National Park is south of it, but it is most definitely in the heart of the Everglades. It is also in the heart of the Miccosukee tribe's ancestral homelands, and they are allies and partners that have joined on to the federal lawsuit as well. So this is something that is a very frustrating location choice for many people. Not only have we lost access as the public, but you have an indigenous community who for lifetimes, time immemorial, have used that land for ceremonial reasons and no longer have access to being able to collect medicine and things that they have always traditionally been allowed to do. There are camps that are less than 1,000 feet away, school bus stops that are less than 1,000 feet away from this facility. And when you hear the narrative that it's in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing there, that is factually untrue. You have many businesses and, again, an entire community and tribal village that are enduring the noise pollution, the light pollution, and all of the things that this has brought into their community. We have a timeline here that Eve had helped put together for us to kind of go back and recount how this all happened. On June 21st, the state of Florida made an unsolicited $20 million offer to buy the remote Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport from Miami-Dade County. I would also like to add that that airport had no potable water, no sufficient power. There's no refueling. There was no tower. It was simply a runway that was used for private aviation practice and some training. But in no way was this an active airport that had hundreds of flights a day coming in and out, or any of the other misinformation that might be floating around out there. On June 22nd, Miccosukee elder Betty Osceola, who lives around 3 miles, for example, from the facility, gathered with hundreds of us to peacefully oppose this seizure and the closing of these gates. She had called me a few days before this and said that gates that had never been shut in her lifetime were now closed, and land that she had led myself, for example, and my family onto and out into the beautiful Big Cypress National Preserve were no longer accessible. So we had a wonderful turnout of people that came to rally in support of land that they've always loved and enjoyed that we no longer had access to. On June 23rd, Miami-Dade Mayor Daniela Levine Cava responded to the state with a letter questioning the environmental impacts and the land's value, thinking it to be far more than $20 million. But Florida doubled down and invoked their emergency powers to start construction. That same day, Friends of the Everglades called on Governor DeSantis to halt the project. June 27th, Friends of the Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity filed a lawsuit against the federal and state governments in Miami-Dade County, demanding that the legally required environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act be adhered to. Knowing that this was going to be used as a detention facility for immigration, and immigration being a federal function, that seemed to make sense. On July 1st, the president toured the site alongside state and federal officials who confirmed FEMA would be matching funding much of the project. And at that point in time, there was a lot of praise at a federal level for this project. July 2nd, the first detainees arrived, and more generators than you can count, and lights came on property that was otherwise previously designated an international dark sky. There had not been a nighttime airplane landing in over 25 years, for example. And the impacts to the community and to the panther and to the bonneted bat and these endangered species were immediately felt. For those of us that were there, hearing that there was no environmental impact seemed, it seemed false, obviously. It's hard to understand how anybody could say that when you could stand on the side of the road and see, smell, touch, taste, sometimes, all of the cars, the exhaust, the fuel, everything that was going on to build this facility. Because again, this was just merely a runway prior to that. And as it notes here, the lights were visible for more than 15 miles away at that point in time. It's since expanded even more. July 11th, Friends of the Everglades, Friends of the Everglades and Center for Biological Diversity filed a 60-day notice of intent to sue under the Endangered Species Act, Clean Water Act, and National Parks Organic Act. The Miccosukee tribe's request to join as co-plaintiffs in a lawsuit was granted on July 30th. This is an example of one of the camps when we refer to a camp out there. These are camps where people either live or they have ceremonial grounds, but there are many scattered in and around the facility known as Alligator Alcatraz. Guys, sorry, I apologize, wrong way. On August 7th, Judge Kathleen Williams granted a 14-day preliminary injunction to halt the new construction at Alligator Alcatraz. And that was a big win. I am a part of that federal lawsuit because I was able to sit and witness what was happening, and I, with my own two eyes, saw Customs and Border Patrol, and we saw a lot of federal agencies coming and going from the facility. Although we were told by the governor and state, federal levels at that point that this was not a federal project, it was state-run, which contradicted what we were seeing. On August 21st, Judge Williams ordered the state of Florida and federal government to halt construction, stop bringing in new detainees, and to begin winding down operations, which was a very big win and something that, again, the Everglades needed, because the impact over the course of that month was significant. We saw countless animals that were hit by the amount of traffic that was coming and going on a daily basis. Again, the displacement of things, even bears, panthers certainly were showing up on game cams in areas they had never shown up on before, simply because, again, the amount of traffic and noise and light that was being generated in an otherwise very quiet, peaceful, dark area was shocking and disturbing. Here we've got a lot of wonderful headlines, and people were very happy to see that there was going to be a pause until we could finish the lawsuit to hear whether or not NEPA needed to be adhered to. Unfortunately, in early September, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals voted 2-1 to pause the lower court's ruling. saying that one, it was a state-operated facility, and that two, Florida had not received any federal funding or reimbursement. Oops, sorry guys, thank you. Oops. Not heard this, I apologize. So that Florida hadn't received any funding or reimbursement. And then in October, the U.S. government attorneys asked to stay the proceedings because of the government shutdown, and their request was granted. So there was at one point, we were hearing that we would go to the Circuit Court of Appeals in January, and they would hear this case. And because of the government shutdown, that has now been prolonged until March or April. I've sitting in here received a press release from the Miccosukee tribe that I would like to read some of to you guys. And it says that the Miccosukee tribe of Indians of Florida, a federally recognized tribal nation at home in the Everglades, remains strongly opposed to alligator Alcatraz's unpermitted and unlawful construction on public lands seized by state emergency order. The appellate's filing resumes the case, which was on pause since the government shutdown, and the tribe looks forward to the next hearing in March and April, the upcoming briefings this month and next, and appreciates the venue to continue advocacy on behalf of Big Cypress and the tribal community. These legal developments follow very important political developments. A week after the 11th Circuit paused the Southern District of Florida's order suspending operation of the facility, and days before the shutdown, the state took $608 million in federal funds. This is almost $200 million over the original estimates to carry out the facility's federal immigration purpose. This federal funding occurs in the context of the 11th Circuit's statement that the state accepting federal funds would lead to a reconsideration of their order, which had paused the district court order in favor of the tribe. According to the Circuit's September 4th order, quote, if the federal defendants ultimately decide to approve the request and reimburse Florida for its expenditures related to the facility, they may need to first conduct an EIS. An EIS being the relief requested by the tribe and co-plaintiffs. So in other words, by accepting these funds, the state has made a major concession, which, along with the evidence presented already, further establishes a clear federal nexus. We knew that somewhat to begin with, those of us that were on site and witnessing what we were witnessing, and the fact that the timing of these things played out as they had was very frustrating to those of us that would like to have seen the original preliminary injunction held so that this could be decided. What Eve and Friends of the Everglades are asking is for our help. We need to contact our state leaders and call our congressmen. There are ways of helping them fund their fight, of course, because this legal battle has now been drawn out and will continue to be so for the foreseeable future because of the complexities the state and federal government continue to bring up or claim to have. And Friends of the Everglades has started this Everglades Defense Fund, which is one of the ways, if people are interested, you can directly help fund this fight through your financial contributions. And Friends of the Everglades, it says, to counter the tremendous legal resources of our adversaries, this fund fuels our landmark lawsuit against alligator Alcatraz and ensures we're ready to take on future threats. We very much need that support. In addition to that, there have been 3 bills filed that will be seen in this upcoming legislative session, because what has happened here is that the state has issued a state of emergency and has declared it on immigration. So for me, and somebody that has been fighting against the governor and these public land seizure attempts, whether it's golf courses or, well, they're all golf courses, it seems, actually, now that I'm thinking about it. In the state parks, with Lupucci State Forest and the WMAs, they won a lot of golf courses. But these executive orders and state of emergencies are allowing the governor to use eminent domain to seize things in land that he wants to use for said emergencies. Unfortunately, we don't have any parameters in place to determine when an emergency is over, how long it lasts, things that would be helpful in having a clear timeline of what we could expect or when we could expect this to be over. And instead, he just is continually renewing his executive orders. So there are 3 bills that have been filed: House Bill 621, Senate Bill 700, and SCR 704. Unfortunately, we are in the position right now where the powers that be seem to have a supermajority, and there's not a lot of support for some of these bills. And the likelihood of them even being heard is slim, but we don't give up hope. And I think that it shines light on a bigger issue that we have and need to recognize that we're setting a very dangerous precedent here, regardless of who is in power. And that is that anybody can declare a state of emergency and use their power to impose or take away things as they see fit. And we know that there have been public lands attacked across the country, and other governors in other states could look to see what we're doing here in Florida and think, well, I'll do this in my state. So I think that, again, regardless of what side you support or where, your beliefs stand, you would like to see some sort of rules and regulations or parameters in place for any state of emergency, regardless of what it's about. And again, I think that as we come into this next legislative session, having dealt with the state parks and the State Park Preservation Act and seen how much support our elected officials seem to show for public lands, which we know to have bipartisan support, there was not follow-up, for example, with funding of things. And it becomes tricky for those of us who are trying to follow along, but we are at a critical time where paying attention is necessary. Otherwise, all of these beautiful conservation lands and things we're trying to save and protect in the future are under threat. So I very much urge people to look carefully at policy and to see who is speaking about what. And I think, again, public lands and conservation have bipartisan support in this state, and that's something I know to be true. And we need to fight for our beloved wild Florida so that we can continue these wonderful initiatives from Martin County Forever and the Guardians and Loxalucy, because they're under attack. Our public lands and our wild Florida are under attack. So we very much appreciate you listening to the updates on Alligator Alcatraz and hope that we can continue to raise enough noise about the location of this particular facility, which again is in the heart of the Everglades, is in the heart of where we have invested billions of taxpayer dollars to restoring flow, that they are now paving 40 acres over and essentially clogging and blocking what we are funding to restore, which does not make very much sense. So, organizations that are fighting this from an environmental standpoint are certainly worthy of support. And there are many who claim to be defenders of the Everglades that are not speaking up right now. And I think, again, it's a very important time to pay attention to who's saying what and then who's doing what. So, again, I appreciate your time, and I appreciate the Guardians giving us the opportunity to update you all. Thank you.
Wonderful. Our last speaker is our own executive director, a professional ecologist for over 30 years of working experience. He's been guiding the Guardians since 2017 in developing science-based solutions and representing us on a number of Martin County environmental organizations and in hosting half-hour podcasts with a variety of conservation NGOs. Is perhaps the most important voice on environmental matters in all of Martin County. Welcome, Greg Braun.
Thanks, Tony. I've got the unenviable position of being the last speaker. We're running late. I know you want to all get to refreshments out there, but I've got a few slides to share with you. And I'm going to start off by just mentioning that the Guardians of Martin County are a 501c3 nonprofit organization. What that means is we are educational. We can't do very much in the way of advocacy. Our role is to provide information so that our followers and people know what's going on. So often that means we're the bearer of bad news, and I guess you've heard some of that tonight. And I'm afraid I'm going to finish with also some kind of bad news. You have heard a number of acronyms tonight. And so I'm going to go back to our role as educators, and I'm going to try to translate some of those that may have slipped by you. We heard from Commissioner Cap, CPAs. Anybody remember? Comp plan amendments. We also heard from Merit a couple of acronyms that slipped by. CERP, Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Program or Plan. We also heard BOCC, Board of County Commissioners. And from Jessica, I just wrote down a couple of acronyms that she used. Flew right off of her tongue like she said it 1,000 times. She talked about NEPA, National Environmental Policy Act. She also said EIS, Environmental Impact Statement. And finally, WMAs. She talks about them all the time, but many of you may not know that they're wildlife management areas. So I'm going to introduce to you in my 9 slides a new acronym, and that is a LULU. Anybody know what LULUs are? Huh? Oh, you haven't been around growth management very long. They are locally unpopular land uses. And that's what I'm going to talk about. Who would have thought that we would have a slaughterhouse proposed in Martin County? And not only a slaughterhouse, what we have heard could be the largest slaughterhouse east of the Mississippi River. So we're trying to spread some education about this. So unfortunately, there's not a lot of facts that are available to us. But I'm going to talk about the Shanty Bay Land Project, what's being proposed that we've been able to find out, and who, if anyone, is watching. So first, where is Shanty Bay Ranch? As many of you may know, Martin County's down would go right out in the middle of Lake Okeechobee. And so the advocacy and the roles, education work that we do is on behalf of clean water. And that's really what brings this project to us today. So it's up in the northwestern part of Martin County. You see there, not quite on the shore, but on the east side of Route 98 there. On an aerial side view, this is where the 2,000-acre ranch is, in northwestern Martin County, right near the Okeechobee County boundary. It's mapped this was actually the debate from PC Palm, and they were sharing with everybody the results of the water quality problem, or the algae in the lake was toxic back in the summer. So that little blue dot down toward the bottom, where water from Lake Okeechobee comes through the C44 or Say's Canal into the Ziggy River. So the Department of Health water quality warning there. So a little bit closer up about what's going on. I mentioned northwestern Martin County. It's on the east side of Lake Okeechobee, east of the Hoover Dike, and mostly east of Route 98 or 441. And a key issue for us is that it is within the Lake Okeechobee watershed. And for those of you who don't know, that one a number of years ago was designated as impaired. That's why it's got these water advisories for toxic algae and that sort of thing. So the slaughterhouse is that kind of brown dot or rectangle that I've got up there in the top, but it's part of the overall ranch. It's about 2,100 acres in size. What's being proposed at the site, it has been very difficult for us to find out. We've been working with the county, and kind of the situation is that they submitted an application into Martin County for review for this facility back quite a while ago. Martin County didn't like what they saw, but they said, okay, if this is coming in, we need to have this, and this as information for us to process this application. Well, the property owner said, I don't want to go through all this. And so they have attempted an end a run around Martin County. And they have employed the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services to do that. And essentially, they have made the determination that Martin County's regulations are preempted by this Florida Right to Farm Act. So although we work collaboratively with the county on a whole bunch of things, we have a lot of respect for their professional staff. The challenge here is that if that FDAC's Attorney General's opinion stands, Martin County will not be able to kind of review the application. There's going to be no preserve area management plans, no protection of threatened and endangered species, a variety of things. So we've been trying to find out more about it, find out about the water quality and that sort of thing, and it's been hard to get factual information. We don't know how many animals are going to be brought onto the property, but what we have heard is that in the big picture, the plan is to bring in cattle from all over northern states, east of the Mississippi, bring them onto the property, raise them for a period of 90 days so that then the meat, once processed, can be sold as grass-fed beef. Now, I'm a steak eater. I like a pig burger. The Guardians aren't necessarily against this project. What we want to make sure is that if it does move forward, that there are adequate controls in there and that water quality is protected. There's not going to be traffic kinds of problems and a variety of things like that. We don't know the extent to which the water will be treated. Slaughterhouses are very big consumers of water. And so they have gotten a permit to withdraw millions of gallons of water from this artificial aquifer, and how that water is going to get treated and what happens to it, we have no idea. We don't know what the standards are for which that water will be treated and where it goes. Our suspicion is that it's going to go into the rim canal for around Lake Okeechobee, and that is one of those water bodies that is already designated as impaired. So protection of wetlands is another thing. Martin County, as many of you know, Martin County has the strongest wetland protection standards in Martin County. There are a few little ways that some developers can get through and impact wetlands, but the vast majority of wetlands are protected, and there's a buffer around those wetlands that also needs to be protected. So if FDEC's Attorney General's opinion that Martin County is preempted, we can't necessarily say that those wetlands would be protected. I've got some information here. There are bald eagles' nests on the property. Caracara have been seen on the property as well. Martin County would require that they remove the invasive species off of the property. We're not getting any indication that that's likely going to be done. And going back to the water quality situation, if they're going to bring in all these cattle and graze them on the 2,000-acre ranch, in order to increase the productivity on that ranch, they're going to need fertilizers. And so we have made a request about the information about existing fertilizer use and what is going to happen in the future. And I'm afraid we have not gotten satisfactory information. So here's a little bit more about the project overall. The meat processing facility is about proposed for 56,000 square feet of area. So that's generally about the size of a Publix. That's what would all be in the meat processing facility. So it's on 26 acres of the ranch. And so just think 26 acres. That's along the lines of about 25 football fields, the area for the meat processing facility itself. We've got a couple aerial photos here, or photos of one kind or another. The one on the left there showing one of those wetlands that's on the property right now. And all that nasty green stuff in the middle is algae bloom of some sort, likely as a result of enhanced nutrients, whether it's the cattle droppings or the runoff from the fertilizers, whatever it is. That's what stimulates those algae blooms. The picture there in the center is in the discharge of this facility where it goes down towards the Lake Okeechobee Rim Canal. So already it's vegetation in it is those species of plants that like those higher levels of nutrients, and they're an invasive species as well. So why do the Guardians care about what's going on? I mentioned there, large consumers of water. The South Florida Water Management has designated the aquifer in Martin County as a water caution area. So a facility like this, they've already gotten their permit to withdraw this 6.8 millions of gallons of water per year for a 20-year period. They're going to be sucking up that same water that is causing our superficial aquifer to cause problems with water, saltwater intrusion, and that sort of thing. And certainly meat processing facilities overall are known to be big sources of potential pollution. I didn't know anything about slaughterhouses before we started getting into this. So as a scientist, I went out and tried to figure out what's going on with these. And we did work with one of the organizations that Jessica just talked about, the Center for Biological Diversity. They've got professionals who have looked at slaughterhouses in other areas, and they have developed this fact sheet about them. And it's in the position paper that the Guardians Board of Directors has now adopted. It's on our website, and generally it talks about overall what are the problems with slaughterhouses overall. And what we then took the next step to do is analyze how each of those problem areas, whether it's water withdrawal or water quality, social justice, those kinds of things, are those relevant concerns here in Martin County and at this facility. You see the sign down there in the bottom. That was right there at the St. Lucie locks, or the Port Miafa locks, where water goes from Lake Okeechobee into the St. Lucie. And you see there may be toxins. You know, we see those repeated blooms of cyanobacteria. Got an aerial picture there on the left of the property just to give you an idea of the proximity. Everything in the lower portion of the photo is part of this ranch. Those round areas are wetlands or other surface waters. And then you see Route 98 in the background with the Rim Canal behind it and Lake Okeechobee. The center picture is an interesting one, and I'm going to recognize Jackie Thurlow-Lippisch, one of the river warriors, and her brother, Todd Thurlow, who has put together this website on Eye of Lake Okeechobee. So the center pictures are, I borrowed them off of his website, and what he's been able to do is look at the aerial photos of Lake Okeechobee, and then through a certain filter able to show those toxic algae blooms. So on the right is the aerial photo as it would normally be, and in the left panel of that, where I've got the triangle showing Martin County's boundary, what you see there is the infrared version that shows those algae blooms in the lake. So our concern is that where this water is going to be flowing off of that property, coming down into the lake, then get sucked in through the C-44, it's going to exacerbate our water quality problems, which you see in the picture on the right that I took a few years ago. That's the toxic algae bloom once it has gotten down into the South Fork of the St. Lucie River. So what are we doing? First off, because information about this is very difficult to come by, we have had to file Freedom of Information Act requests. I'm going to acknowledge our attorney, regarding his attorney back here in the back row. Wave there, Mike Durham, so everybody sees you. Whether or not we win the battle with this, I don't think it's going to be on our environmental kinds of things. It's going to be in the legal battle. And that is essentially whether or not this project meets or does not meet the Florida Right to Farm Act, an act that was passed by the legislature a number of years ago. And it was meant to keep out sort of nuisance or frivolous lawsuits against agricultural operations. We think that all of our concerns are very valid. What Mike has looked into the law about is he has, and this is in our position paper, we think that by essentially subdividing the property into the ranch and the slaughterhouse itself should be an industrial operation, not an agricultural operation that should be given protection under the Florida Right to Farm Act. So we're going to be relying on Mike heavily as we move forward with this. What other things are we doing? Certainly the water management district permit is something that is publicly available. So the information that they provided is what has provided what little details we have about the facility overall, because again, they withdrew their application into Martin County. I mentioned the preserve area management plan that would be required if Martin County is able to go through and make sure that the project is compliant with the comp plan and land development regulations. We're also coordinating with a variety of our non-governmental organization colleagues. We're not going to win, the Guardians aren't going to win this battle on our own. We're going to need Jessica and Eve Samples and Gil Smart and Florida Oceanographic Society, the Rivers Coalition, all these different entities who all share our concerns about water quality. We have released this position paper. It is pretty lengthy. It'll put you to sleep probably, but the Guardians board felt like it was necessary for us to go through a pretty detailed analysis of this, because we don't want our concerns about the project to just be blown off as a opposition to one of those locally unpopular land uses. So it's got a lot of citations in it and that sort of thing, and we believe that it will pass the review of various legal entities, and certainly we circulated around to these non-governmental organizations, our colleagues, and it was improved by their review of it. So we released that paper last month, and the next step of that was to go to the Martin County Commission and ask them for what likely will be the one and only public hearing about this project. If the Attorney General for the FDACS, the Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, if his letter stands, Martin County would be preempted. There would be no public hearings at the state level, none at the federal level. So the only way the public is going to find out about this is based on our request to Martin County that they put it on an agenda for future discussion. So thank you, Commissioner Capps, for making the motion that set that in place. I don't know that a date has been set on that yet. I have heard possibly in January. Do you have any update on that?
I don't think it's in on January 6th, our first meeting of the year, so it must be the next one.
Okay.
Because I've seen a draft agenda for the January 6th meeting, and I don't remember that being there.
Okay, well, that's great. We will be working closely with the county, and then all of you to let you know once it does get scheduled, because we would like to fill that commission chamber with people who are interested in getting factual information about this project. So research continues. We're going to be filing another FOIA request to get additional information. So if you care about transparency and water quality, just kind of stay tuned and you'll hear from us first. Thank you.
I just want to thank you all for coming, and also thank you all for the support that you give us through the years. And please join us for refreshments outside and any discussions you want to have with our illustrious speakers, who I think we are very happy to be able to hear from today. Thanks so much.